And now, Contracting Leadership with Heidi Timmerman.
Good morning. My name is Heidi Timmerman, and I am a lecturer for the University of Tennessee and an independent consultant. And I'm honored to be here with you today to talk about contracting leadership. First, I must give you a short disclaimer that the opinions I'm going to express this morning are mine and mine alone. What is the first thing that you think about when you hear the topic contracting leadership? When you think about contract management leadership, acquisition leadership, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? For me, it's ethics, folks, ethics. And I challenge you, if there is something that spurs your mind today that you want to ask me a question about, I will be in the Q&A session a little bit later this morning, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So let's dive into ethics. First, to have a conversation about ethics, we got to define it. What is ethics? In our line of work, what is ethics? Let me take you to one of my favorite books, NCMA's Contract Management Book of Knowledge. It defines ethics here as an intertwined organizational ethics, and personal ethics. Can you have one without the other? I don't think so. I think that they are intertwined. I think that they must be solid on both fronts to be successful. The employees can't take their personal ethics on and off like a coat and leave them on the back of a chair or a door when they come into work. They must bring their personal ethics with them, and that must be the foundation of your organizational ethics, in my opinion. Let's go to another great book, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It talks about ethics as a system. And aren't we a system when we work well? Agencies, prime contractors, lower tier contractors, small businesses, all alike, conducting business with fairness, integrity, and openness makes us an ethical system. So let's move from organizational ethics as a theory to a practice. Why have a written code of ethics? Why write it down? When I ask this of audiences, I get a myriad of answers, all outstanding. But the ones that resonate the most are those that revolve around setting expectations, setting the standard. Because if folks don't know what's expected of them, how can they live up to it, right? So why have a written code of ethics? Another reason would be because it's law. Policy tells us that we have to conduct ourselves with the highest degree of integrity. And then to outline those requirements, it gives us one of my favorite clauses, 52203-13, the Contractor Code of Business Ethics and Conduct. It is found in solicitations and contracts that are over 5.5 million and greater than 120 days. This, of course, excludes some small businesses that haven't met this threshold. There's also exemptions for commercial and OCONUS. However, as we talked about, having a written code of ethics sets those standards and expectations. This bar clause outlines all of those requirements. And while we won't have time to go into them today in great detail, I will tell you that it outlines the requirements to have a purpose, an internal control mechanism and program around the code of ethics, the mandatory disclosures, and what to do when something is found, how to do those disclosures, and of course, the different reporting mechanisms for your employees. So from organizational ethics, as we mentioned, they're intertwined with personal ethics. How do you define personal ethics? Well, when I ask this question of audiences, I get a ton of responses. A lot of them are along the line of the difference between right and wrong. They go towards the moral answer, admitting mistakes, having an internal compass that guides your path, conducting yourself personally and professionally with guardrails down the road, guideposts. The conduct, good conduct, even when no one is looking. This last statement makes me think, especially this time of year, of the elf on the shelf that I put out for my 8-year-old that helps with his behavior. But the point of personal ethics definition is that you don't need somebody watching you. And one of the tips that I like to share with new managers is I have found it to be very rewarding to disclose mistakes in staff meetings and then talk about how the mistake happened and maybe how I solved it or didn't solve it so that others could benefit from that disclosure and not make the same mistake that I made. I attribute this to an aspect of personal ethics that cross into team and organizational ethics. So, how do you define personal ethics? Going back to the Simbach, there's a statement that really is a good definition in my mind of a model of somebody that has their ethics locked in. And that is somebody that has thought through their ethics enough that they can speak to them, that they've applied them when push comes to shove. And I think if we all stop a moment, we can think of a situation when our ethics had to be applied. And the model is consistent with their ethics. They don't change because of situations, they are consistent. So, what do you think of this definition? Somebody that has developed their values and ethics is somebody that has thought through them, can speak to them, can apply them when it matters, and is consistent. Here's a tool from my toolbox that I would like to share with you. When you are talking about personal ethics, whether it be for the contract management team or maybe even more so for the different organizations of folks that we interact with for our purpose, for our work, like training a source selection board. And you have to talk to somebody about this topic. And maybe it's gift giving or other aspects of that 52203-13 or your written code of ethics that you must have. One of the tools I like to use is this list of questions. You could provide it to that team and say, if you're stuck in a situation, obviously always come see me or your ethics officer, but here's also a list of questions you can ask yourself to help you as those guides or guideposts. My favorite on this list is H. And maybe I am showing my age, but I like to say that if you're thinking of a sticky situation, maybe lunch with a vendor or something that's been offered, picture yourself in the restaurant with that vendor on a picture of it on the front page of the newspaper. How does it feel? If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And that's why I like this set of questions. Just a tool for your toolbox. So let's get personal with personal ethics to contract management specifically. To be effective, we as contract leaders must be able to perform contract management with the highest standards of ethical behavior. So I must ask you another very intriguing question. Who sets those standards? Who sets the standards of ethical behavior for your organization, for your agency, for your entity, for your small business? Who sets those standards? It is something that has always been of interest to me, especially as I lead teams and they come up to me as I've been in this line of work for 20 years. They say, Heidi, why does it seem like we're always the compliance police or we're always the ones that find things? So when I came across this saying in the Simbach, it really hit me hard that others look to us, to the contract managers, to define the acceptable standard of behavior. it didn't hit me hard in a bad way. It hit me hard in a truthful way that we are the ones that set the standard of acceptable behavior. So, a couple of years ago, almost a couple of years ago, I wanted to test this question. And so I asked this poll. So that's why I have this picture in here so you can see the results of the poll. I asked a room of over 2,000 some folks, contracting folks mostly, do they feel that contracts and acquisition professionals are held to a higher standard than other professionals in our organizations and agencies and entities? Over 90% of them agreed that we are. So I believe that this was a good benchmark that proved this statement that other professionals in the organization frequently look to the contract manager to set the standard of acceptable behavior. Okay, so now that we've talked about organizational ethics and personal ethics and how they intertwine some, I'd like to have a little bit of fun with an exercise or case study. So I'm going to describe it to you, and I want you to think through what you would do, and then I will give you the array of responses that I have received from one end of the spectrum to the other. Because I think the goal of training on ethics is not to jump to an answer right away, but it's to understand that people come with different perspectives to the same problem. And the benefit of ethics training is understanding that there is a myriad of perspectives and having talked through and listened through a number of those perspectives so that when you actually encounter a real circumstance, you are prepared for various perspectives and are better prepared to deal with the outcome. So let's jump into this exercise and case study. You are a customer contract administrator in my scenario for a prime government contractor. Many of you probably are or have been in your career. And so in this scenario, you helped propose and win on a $1 million firm fixed price contractor for the government. And you were awarded a scope of work that included, coincidentally, 12 clear deliverables, one per month for that year of performance. You were paid $500,000. You negotiated an upfront payment of half of the funds at the beginning of the contract, and the other half are due at the end of the contract. Halfway through the year, you discover that only deliverables 1 through 2, not 1 through 6, were completed. So you check in with your project manager and you find out from him that the COTAR, or the contracting officer technical representative, decided that the rest deliverables 3, 4, 5, and 6, and oh, by the way, 7 and 8 probably aren't going to be needed, or that the ones up to 6 aren't, and then the future ones probably aren't. No, he has not discussed this with the CO. So now you're in this circumstance as a contract manager for your organization. What do you do? Here's another pictorial of the situation of the case or the exercise. 1 through 2 went along and were delivered swimmingly. You are here between month 6 and 7, which also places you between deliverable 6 and 7. You'll see that a number of these deliverables, whether they be reports or meetings or whatnot, most likely take input from the government. So what do you do? Some of you may say, the answer is clear. It's clear cut. I go to my CO or I go to my COTAR and I have a meeting with them and I tell them where we are. I allow them to change the price, or I ask them to change the price. That may be the first thing you think of. And that has been a response, a very common response I've received. There has been a lot of discussion about the COTAR changes in contract without authority, or the PM, what should happen from the PM's perspective and their authority, or what they've done or not done. But again, you are in this scenario. I have heard an array of answers, as I mentioned. On one end of the spectrum, I've heard folks say from a government perspective, not necessarily all, but just some, well, I would give notice and go down a path of termination for default. This contractor is not performing. I would request the 500,000 that's already been paid back, and I would proceed with the termination for default and end the contract. That's one end of the spectrum. And you can probably, if you think through, find validity in that perspective. Flipping to the other side, I have found business folks that have said, this is firm fixed price. I will do nothing of the sort. I will just go along and I will complete whatever I need to complete, whatever I can complete, and I will collect my money. It's firm fixed price, folks. That's the way it is. Once I sign, I get the money. That's the other end of the spectrum. And then I've heard a lot of discussion in between. I faced a similar circumstance to this, not this exact thing, but a similar circumstance, and actually had some interesting discussions internal to my organization. But I fought for and proceeded with transparency. We prepared a new price based on what we understood to be the new scope and approached our government partner and said, it appears to be a different scope. Here's what would be a different price for this. Let's have a conversation about it. Mr. or Mrs. Government, what would you like to do? In case you want to do a change order, here's the new information. The reward that we received for that transparency was that we became a preferred vendor for that government agency in the year to come. And they openly said to me that, and to the team, that we became a preferred vendor because of our transparency and honesty. So while not a fun situation by any means, and is one that we worked through, and I would say one that we worked through as a team because we talk about ethics, because we have a written code of conduct, and our team that was not afraid to have the discussions. So I hope you two have enjoyed this case and this discussion on ethics. And here's my contact information, and I would love to hear from you either one-on-one or in the Q&A session in a little bit. Thank you so very much for letting me be a part of your training this morning. You have already won by spending your time and investing your time in training. Thank you.